All right, guys, in this video, we're actually going to talk about inverse functions and what those look like, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is give you the property of inverse functions. And the property of inverse functions says this. Suppose that f and f inverse, that looks like f to the negative 1, so we say f inverse. So I'm going to highlight that. So this right here, we say f inverse when we're reading that, okay? We say f inverse. So suppose f and f inverse are inverse functions. Then that means that f of a equals b if and only if. Now remember that statement, if and only if, means that you can go either way. If f of a equals b, then this, or if f inverse of b equals a, then you can have f of a equals b. So f of a equals b if and only if f inverse of b equals a. Notice how they changed. Normally, this is f of x equals y. So notice here was x and here was y, and now what they've done is flipped those. This one is now the x and this one is now the y, okay? So they've flipped them. So in other words, I gave you kind of a hint here. So the hint that I'm going to tell you is that means you're going to switch x and y in order to find the inverse, okay? You're going to switch your x and your y in order to find it. So down here it says find the inverse of each function and then graph the function and its inverse using Desmos, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to find the inverse of this function a here, okay? So we've got f of x equals 2/3 x minus 1. Now remember, f of x, that's the same thing as y. So we could replace that with a y. So y equals 2/3 x minus 1. Now remember up here in your hint, I said you're going to switch x and y. So this y is now going to be an x, and this x is now going to be a y. We're going to switch their places. Then once you do that, you need to solve for y. So once you switch them, then you need to solve for y. This is your key step right here, okay? So in order to solve this equation for y, the first thing I would do is add 1 to both sides. Okay, so that's going to give me x plus 1 equals 2/3 y. Now I need to isolate y by itself, so in order to do that, I need to multiply both sides by 3/2. Okay, that cancels and that cancels, so that I'm just left with y on that side. Okay, now if I distribute this 3/2 to both of those, 3/2 times x is 3/2 x, and 3/2 times 1 is 3/2. Once you get your y isolated over here by itself, you have found what your inverse function is. So I'm going to write down here my inverse, that's f, it looks like f to the negative 1. We say f inverse of x equals 3/2 x plus 3/2. And this is your final answer. Okay? Now, if we wanted to graph those and see what they look like, now, I'm not going to make you draw those on the paper, but let's go and let's graph those on Desmos and see what they look like, okay? So let's go to Desmos. Oops. And I'm going to type in both of these. Now, you can type in both of these at the same time. So I'm going to type in 2/3 x minus 1. And then in the other one, I'm going to type in 3/2 x plus 3/2. Okay, and there you can see your, let me go out a little bit. You can see your two functions that you've graphed here. The red line is your original, and then the blue line is your inverse function. Okay, so that's what they'll look like. All right, let's go back to here, and let's look at f of x equals 2x minus 3. Now again, remember, we're going to replace that f of x with y. So do that first. Then we're going to switch the x and the y where they're at. So this is going to be x equals 2y minus 3. Once you get to this point, you have to solve for y. Okay, you need to solve for y at this point. Okay, so to solve for y, I'm going to add 3 to both sides to start with. Okay, that's going to give me x plus 3 equals 2y. And then to get rid of the 2 over here, we're going to divide both sides by 2. Okay, so here we have y. And then over here, I'm going to pull that apart, and it's going to be 1/2 x, because there's like a 1 in front of that x. So 1/2 x plus 3/2. Now we're going to write our inverse function. Remember, we do that using f inverse of x equals 1/2 x plus 3/2. You're going to write what you came up with there, and that will be your answer. Okay. Now, if I wanted to graph both of those, I would go to Desmos. I'm going to turn these off. And we're graphing 2x minus 3. And also 1/2 x plus 3/2. And that's what those two graphs would look like. So there is the red one is your original function, and the green one is your f inverse. Okay? All right, if we go back to here, there is a you try problem. I would like for you to pause the video, try this problem, and then come back and I will work it. Okay, hopefully you've worked this problem. And so we're going to replace now this f of x with y. That's your first step. Then you're going to switch x and y. So x equals 1/4 y minus 2. Then you're going to start solving for y. So this is the point where you solve for y. Okay? So we're going to add 2 to both sides. That gives us x plus 2 equals 1/4 y. Then to get rid of that 1/4 over there, we're going to multiply both sides by 4. Multiply both sides by 4. So that cancels out, which leaves us with y. And then if we distribute that 4 to both, that will be 4x plus 8. So to write our inverse function, this is going to be f inverse of x equals 4x plus 8. And this would be our answer. Now, if you went to Desmos and graphed that, so we would have 1/4 x plus, minus 2. And then the other one will be 4x plus 8. Okay? So the purple is our original function, and the black is the inverse function. Okay? All right, guys. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and let me know.